My name is Dr. Alexandra Palmer. I'm in textiles and fashion at the Royal Ontario Museum. It's a global collection that moves across time, it moves across culture. And myself and Dr. Sarah Fee are the two curators. And we've been joined by Dr. Fahmida Suleman, who is in Islamic art and culture. And together, the three of us have collected probably one of the largest collection of non-medical COVID masks in a museum. So our research never stopped. And during the pandemic, we turned to look at COVID masks. And why did we do that? Well, it's the biodiversity. This is a collection, the ROM's collection for all people, all genders, all races, all bodies, all ages. So a mask is a perfect tiny object that captures everything and everyone. And it also takes up a small amount of storage space, which is really great. Masks seem to be the new t-shirt, a fashion accessory that we're all going to have to deal with in our lives. We were careful not to take away from PPE, from people who really needed it. And now we have a collection of over 21 represented countries from around the world. So next slide, please. The masks were made by a range of people, industrial, craft production, all kinds of ways of making masks. These are cultural objects that are the front and center of individuals. They're expressive of many things, of who you are. But what is really amazing when we put it all together and we all collect it in our own areas is how all the masks have these resonances across culture, and that we are really all in it together in this pandemic. And it shows the ingenuity of mask making and clever and very thoughtful responses. Masks give agency to individuals and groups. They're one thing you could do when you were at home. You could take back power in a powerless situation. Next slide, please. They're messaging for social, political, cultural, personal, and overwhelmingly, they have brought people together. The doing, the making, the giving, the creativity, the reinvention of business, creating a new business, setting up new channels to get masks or food or financial support to those that need it, that came from mask selling. They really were amazing. So we had incredible initiatives. And we watched this unfold in real time, and we collected in real time. So there are incredible things like the sewing army started in Toronto that sent out a pattern, and people everywhere were contributing to different causes locally and getting things out to people who really needed it. Next slide, please. People were repurposing custom textiles and redesigning things. And I just want to go over a little bit of what happened, because we've forgotten. It's a year ago. We're probably about to go into a deep lockdown here again in Toronto. It wasn't until March last year, on the 11th, that COVID was actually declared a pandemic, and you had to kind of look up what a pandemic was, because we haven't really experienced that before. The museum closed its doors for longer than it's ever in its history. But on the 15th of March, Dr. Theresa Tam said there would be no more public gatherings of over 250 people, which seems like an awful lot at the moment, and that the situation was quote unquote serious. Next slide, please. A mask started being produced. Companies such as Please Collective in Toronto, whose whole goal is to raise money and give back to causes through making products, a lot of which were worn by sports teams or represent sports teams. Handmade by 14 seamstresses who'd lost jobs, immediately started responding, and Justin Trudeau standing outside Rideau Cottage as his wife was ill inside with COVID, saying enough is enough, go home, stay home. And the masks really signaling that message. Next slide, please. The supply chain was broken. It was broken for fashion. Fashion magazines were no longer doing shoots. The circular system was not working. In fact, we don't even need any new fashion. People wondered what was the point of it. You reach into your closet, you just wear a top for your Zoom call. initiatives such as Maritime Tartan, a very small company in Halifax, launched her masks on National Tartan Day. The company was barely a year old and obviously was no longer relying on the tourist industry. The owner, Sherry Kearney, decided not to take serb, and in classic sort of Nova Scotian fashion, sat down at her sewing machine and made masks from her tartans and was selling them. And then the terrible shooting happened in Nova Scotia, and the Nova Scotia tartan took on incredible meaning. And most of the money she raised was going back to local charities and food banks. And to date, she's raised over $25,000. Next slide, please. On May 20th, nearly a year ago today, Canada actually recommended that we wear face masks. This was, we were still kind of dithering about it and not wearing them, and some people were and some people weren't, if you remember when you were standing outside at the grocery shop. So people such as Johnny Mask reached into his trove of black log materials and made these masks for himself and his daughter, and tried to find a way to protect his family and look after himself, and made these wonderful superhero masks so they could be protected. Next slide, please. On May 25th, then, we had the terrible murder of George Floyd in America, in Minneapolis, and the ensuing protests worldwide of many, many, many people, mainly masked, demonstrating against the Black Lives Matter movement, people of every color and race. And sports teams such as the Toronto Raptors and their coach Nick Nurse donning these very supportive masks of Black Lives Matter that were made by Nadia Lloyd, a Toronto designer who pivoted her business to make these masks, and discussed these issues with her son, who together they produced this mask with the motif of the Toronto skyline, the CN Tower, and the Black Fist. And $5 of every sale goes back to Black Lives Matter. People were doing things, or this other mask where the sales went to Bail Project to help release protesters. And I'd like to say we were very conscious in purchasing these masks that we were contributing to causes and not taking away from things. Next slide, please. On June 24th, things started looking up, hopefully, and we entered stage 2, and Torontonians could go outside and go and have cocktails with their friends and actually see people face to face, masked and unmasked. And clever designers such as Helene Clarkson made this wonderful happy hour mask with comes with a recyclable straw, metal straw, and brought back one of her workers and tried to sustain her business. Next slide, please. And then in August, the terrible explosion happened in Beirut, and causing hundreds and thousands of people to be homeless and disrupted. And designers such as Waleed in London, who has a fantastic luxury clothing brand where he recycles historical textiles. And he just was getting back into his office these face masks he made out of the remnants of old shirts that he'd also remade into things, and decided to give 100% of the proceeds of that to the Lebanese and to their charities. Next slide, please. And in November, Dr. Teresa Tam again coming back and saying, okay, now we need 3-layer masks. 2 layers are not quite good enough anymore. This pandemic is not going anywhere fast. And emphasized fit and the importance of wearing masks properly and closely around your face, and said, please don't throw away your 2-layer masks, please wear them and use a filter. Next slide, please. But companies were already ahead of the game. Fashion has to anticipate what's coming, and they're good at it. So Elalem, the Coast Sail fashion house out west, was working with Oddball Workshop in Vancouver, and Oddball had already tested the effectiveness of their textile they were using to make 3-layer masks, and they made this, they got the results back just at that same time that said their masks were 96% effective, which is really quite astonishing, I think. And they digitally print these designs for different houses, including Elalem and this wonderful, very powerful symbol of the eagle that their brother designed on a mask. Next slide, please. Other designers were considering people who perhaps masks were not made for. One size does not fit all. Is Adaptive, the Toronto company, worked with Canadian Hearing Services, and 20% of the sales went to the Hearing Society. This is a mask so that people who are hearing impaired can read your lips. So we want you to wear this mask. It's not for, it's not only for people who are hearing impaired, it's to help them communicate with those who are not. Ailey Design in Montreal, considering the blind people and putting Swarovski crystals on their garments, and this one saying chin up, mask on, so that when you're reaching for your clothes, you know what it is you're actually going to put on your face. And other very creative designs, such as the singing mask, a pattern that was developed and improved upon by this version by Diana Coatsworth, Toronto, who also set up the Sewing Army, by the way, so that you could inhale and exhale and sing. And singing became a very important part of community during the lockdown. Now I'd like to pass the slides over to Sarah Fee, and she can tell you about her fabulous collecting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. So yes, I'm Sarah Fee, and I'm also a curator of global fashion and textiles. And my responsibility in our department is to collect objects and research them from Africa and Asia. So my own goals in collecting face masks were similar in many ways to Alexandra's, but I took as my own goals to find handcrafted face masks from as many points of the world as I could, to document that this is a global pandemic that has touched everyone, everywhere. And also to support textile artisans as much as possible, either by buying directly from them or through organizations that gave some proceeds to relief efforts in their communities. And already very early on, from March and April, I was hearing about the effects that tourism had had on textile artisans globally, because many have become dependent on the tourist trade that, of course, had disappeared. And as one group I'll be talking about from West Bengal said, we have no money saved, we have nothing in our hands, what do we do? But you know, things were happening very quickly, but artisans always respond very quickly, and they were already pivoting, and many began to use their existing stock to make face masks, which can have very simple shapes and often did at the very beginning. And social media like Facebook and Instagram were helping to get the word out quickly. All this was happening fast. And it was through these channels and through colleagues in various parts of the world that the first masks came into the ROM. The one on the left came from Oaxaca, Mexico, from the Dream Weavers Women's Cooperative, that women are often the primary breadwinners and they needed to quickly find ways to keep income coming in. And then on the right, you can see a rather different type that came from the famous tent makers of Cairo, applique on cotton. Next slide, please, or next image. And as you can see that, oops, I'm sorry, if you can go back. Yeah, and then one, oh, there, no, we're good right there. So what you see in the bottom right then is what happened through time is that these groups that had to react quickly had time then to refine their designs and their approaches. So what you see is a mask on the right, also from the tent makers of Cairo, that they designed later in the summer, the early fall, and they made longer straps on it, as you can see, so that women wearing headscarves could have an easier time putting their masks on. And as you can see in both these examples, one from Mexico, one from Cairo, both are expressing very iconic textile types that are very close to community identity. So locally, these were also used to express an idea of resilience and community together. Next slide, please. Another goal that I had was to build up where possible and complement already existing ROM collections. And at the ROM, we're very fortunate to have a very varied collection of handwoven garments from the Philippines. And I wish to thank Lynn Milgram of OCADU, who connected me to Cambio, a Toronto-based Filipino-Canadian business that was channeling handwoven masks to Canada from the Philippines. And Cambio obtained its mask, 3 of which you see here, from an NGO called Rags to Riches, based in the Philippines, that both ethically sourced the handwoven fabrics directly from hand weaving cooperatives, and they also hired women in Manila to do the stitching, because not only rural weavers were out of work, but so too were urban seamstresses, and Cambio gave back parts of its proceedings to community projects. Next image, please. And then these just came in this month. This is from the southern Philippines, which is much harder to access in terms of getting items out. And so I'm very grateful to Dr. Annabelle Salvador Amoris, who channeled these to the ROM, and they represent 3 very iconic types of weaves and decoration from the southern Philippines that include banana thread, which you see at the bottom, embroidery, and tapestry. Next image, please. And then we obtained this donation from Patis Tesoro, who's one of the top fashion designers in the Philippines. And she herself has supports several workshops that work exclusively for her. And she also needed to keep her business going, to keep her artisans going. So she crafted these very high-end fashion masks that also reflect a lot of Filipino identity. They are actually made in part of pineapple fiber, and they are hand embroidered using the famous embroidery skills of the Philippines. Next image, please. As Alex mentioned, the DIY was a big part of the early mask making, and this example came from the Upcycle Stitches Company, which was founded by Atsushi Futatsuya. And it is based on the art of sashiko, which is an embroidery recycling technique from Japan. And he was getting a lot of demands to sell his masks, but what he decided to do was instead to put together these kits so you could make your own. So he sent the indigo fabric, the floss, the needles, everything you needed to do it. And this was not only a question of time, he also wanted to encourage people to do this. He saw it as a safe activity that you would stay at home. It would encourage you to stay at home. And also needlework is very meditative, so it would help people calm themselves. You would learn sustainable skills while you're in lockdown that you could use afterwards. And also you could actually find community by doing this, because he had open Zoom meetings where you could just quietly stitch together. Next image, please. Just very quickly, a big thanks to colleague and friend Mala Sinha, the Bodo Studio of Gujarat, India. While she herself was in lockdown in the summer of 2020, she put together over 100 different masks from across India to represent all the different styles and techniques, and sent them to the ROM. So you see a very small sample here. She in turn turned to NGOs such as Dastkari Hat and Hands on Daskar and Kala Chaupal, all who were trying to help connect buyers to artisan mask makers. Now, of course, the most intriguing one is on the left. These are actually paper mache, and they were recreated by these paper mache mask makers who traditionally create these for an annual dance ceremony, which was in April. And their fear was, of course, it would have to be canceled. But what they did is they created cotton inserts that could go into these masks to keep the dancers safe. Another fun part of this story is that there is a warrior character in this dance, and they renamed him the COVID warrior, and that's what he became in 2020's enactment, an anti-COVID warrior. Next slide, please. So coming closer to home, to Toronto, actually to Brampton, Ontario, as Alexandra mentioned, in the end, no one mask fits all. And there are special challenges for the Sikh community in wearing masks on top of both turbans and beards. So Sanjeet Kaur, of her fashion label Akor brand in Brampton, she stepped up to this design challenge. Next image, please. And what she did was design this mask that you can see in the center bottom, which has an extra wide strap on it, and it also has snaps. Her inspiration was actually her husband, who is a policeman and was on the front line every day in 2020. So he needed masks that would stay firmly in place and that could also be washed. So she came up with the snaps, having experimented with Velcro. The group also created new turban designs, which you can see in the upper left. This one is called Intense. And it was inspired by COVID and the idea that we should seize the day and also, of course, challenge COVID with beauty and resiliency. And final slide, please. And then I just want to finish with this donation that came to us from the Chinese Canadian National Council for Social Justice. They got a grant from the Department of Canadian Heritage to combat anti-Asian racism that was already flaring up and continues in the Toronto area. And they made this mask, Stop the Spread of Racism. And they put together education kits and a PR campaign that had prominent Canadians, including Mayor Tory, to put on the mask and deliver anti-racism messages. So you can see in a whirlwind all the various expressions that masks can be capable of conveying. Thank you. And I will now pass it on to colleague Fahmida Suleman.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for sticking with us. I see that friends from France and the UK have joined, and I know it's late in the evening there, but thank you for the support. So I'm Fahmida Suleman. I'm curator of the Islamic World Collections at the ROM. And so as part of this team of curators, one of the reasons that I wanted to collect masks was I wanted to cover the areas of the Middle East and Central Asia, but also makers who are from the regions, but living in diaspora in North America or in Europe. So the masks I collected, they relate to makers from these regions, particularly people who wanted to give back to their communities and wanted to support local artisans. But I also chose masks that speak to cultural and community identities, but also relate to the ROM's existing collections from the Islamic world. So whether they are relating to artistic motifs on objects or textile traditions, literary traditions, and beliefs and practices. So I'm just going to share 5 of my favorite masks that I collected. Oh dear. So the first one is from Turkey. And it's made by a company called Bebek Jewelers based in Istanbul, but founded by 2 Pakistani American sisters, Sonia and Sehrish. I think probably everyone recognizes this symbol. It's the symbol of the evil eye, or the nazar, and it's recognized throughout the Mediterranean world and elsewhere as a protective amulet against misfortune, ill health, and particularly the evil eye, or the eye of envy, which sometimes arises from human emotions of jealousy and envy. So what a great thing to wear during a pandemic. The second one I wanted to highlight is by an Iraqi American artist called Mohammed Al-Shamri. Now his artists explore the consequences of political turmoil in Iraq and the surrounding region, as well as notions of Arab identity and themes of mourning and loss. So for his masks, he used luggage sticker motifs, that say fragile or handle with care. And they reference the fragility of human beings and the earth during this global pandemic. And this mask was part of a set of 6 masks that were very generously donated to us by the Kinda Foundation of Contemporary Arab Art. And so other artists that we received come from UAE, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, and another one from Iraq as well. My third mask that I chose is by a Palestinian Jordanian designer called Rami Kashu, who's based in New York. Now, Rami's masks are a celebration of Palestinian cross-stitch embroidery and textile weaving. Each mask represents a different village tradition of textile craft, and sometimes they play with Arabic calligraphic forms, or they reference rites of passage. So Rami employed local artisans in Jordan to assist in the making of these masks. And similarly, he then assisted them to earn a living during the pandemic, so that they could, basically enhance their livelihoods during this difficult time. So this one in particular I'm showing you has cross-stitched geometric motifs, rhinestones, and metal coins, and is inspired by traditional marriage headdresses called the shatwe, which is traditionally worn by a Palestinian bride on her wedding day in Bethlehem and Jerusalem. And all of Rami's masks, we collected 7 in total, speak to the ROM's collections in this way. So I've shown you a beautiful example of a shatwe that's in our collection below. This is one of our really favorite fun ones. Now, the graphic designer Yazdan Sadi, who lives in Iran, he started to make masks to promote mask wearing in Iran and to give people hope that the virus would be ultimately conquered. So the masks you see on the top right there, they're not meant to be worn because they're fully painted. So they're more iconic art objects. But what he did was he referenced a very important literary work called the Shahnameh, or the Book of Kings. And it is a masterpiece of Iranian literature written by the poet Firdausi around 1000 AD. And what Yazdan did is he made a collection of masks for me depicting the story of the hero Rustam, okay, the bearded fellow who's on top of that white demon there. So Rustam is this amazing hero in the Shahnameh, and he has to go through 7 challenges or 7 trials. He's kind of on a quest to free this king who's been captured and blinded. And so what Yazdan did is he created these 7 masks representing those 7 challenges, but each challenge or each demon that Rustam fights is a personification of the coronavirus demon. And I quote what Yazdan says: "The virus personified as a demon expresses my views about this man-made virus and its impact on nature and humans. As a reminder of these strange and unbelievable days, and as a symbol of the human fight against this hornless, tailless, and invisible demon." So Yazdan's work once again speaks to the ROM's collection, because I show you a painting from a manuscript of the Shahnameh showing Rustam slaying the white demon. And what's also very interesting is Rustam, he ends up saving the king who was kidnapped by these demons. And in order to cure his blindness, he had to take some of the blood of the white demon and drop it into the king's eyes. And then the king was able to miraculously see again. And in the same way, the coronavirus, in order to create a vaccine, you need a bit of the virus itself to transform into a vaccination, and then you are then miraculously protected from the virus. So I thought that was a great story to tell. My final example, they're paper masks. And they're very interesting because they're made of paper and they have little coffee filter inserts in them. And they're designed by the Toronto-based designers Mojgan Rahimanejad and Mahrokh Ahanka. Now, Mahrokh is the owner of Queen Gallery in Toronto, and she's a real supporter of Iranian artists. And they made these wonderful, wonderful masks and included a beautiful line of poetry in calligraphic script. And the poem is called Bani Adam, or the children of Adam, which also means human beings. And the poem on the front says, well, in the translation is, human beings are members of a whole, in creation of one essence and soul. If one member is afflicted with pain, other members uneasy will remain. So I think, this is a very famous poem by Saadi Shirazi, who's a 13th century poet. And it's so famous that it appears on a very large carpet that hangs in the United Nations, which was presented by the Iranian government in 2005. So a lot of people know this poem, but I also wanted to end on this one because I felt that the sentiments, though very, very specific to an Iranian or a Persian culture, they, on the other hand, are very universal messages that really we are all in this together. So I'd like to end on a couple points. One is to thank Erin on behalf of everyone here for doing an amazing job at organizing this wonderful colloquium, despite all the challenges of the pandemic. But Sarah and I would really like to thank Alex Palmer, because she was diagnosed with COVID-19 last week. And so she's bravely championing this paper for us today, despite being completely isolated and probably not feeling that great. And finally, if you enjoyed our little talk about the masks, well, we have a treat for you, because we are going to have an exhibition about our mask collection at the ROM in September, and it's going to be free of charge, and it's going to be on for about 6 months, I think. So I really hope that people will come to visit our exhibition. So I think, yep, that's it. Thank you. And don't forget to wear your mask.